Hello and welcome back. Today I'm going to unleash my inner ready to glare and do a reaction video to an article that was sent to me. The article is 5 couples lined up for CRISPR babies to avoid deafness. So that sounds like something that is going to be a very interesting article to read as someone who is deaf. But before we get to the reaction, if you haven't yet, do subscribe and hit that notification bell when you do so that you get notified when I upload a new video. Also, consider being a pledge on Patreon. It really helps to support my work and you get exclusive content for as little as $1 a month. So I'll have that linked down below. Oh, let's get into it. 5 Russian couples who are deaf want to try CRISPR gene editing technique so they can have a biological child who can hear. This already sounds like an Alexander Graham Bell moment to me, which, if you do not know who Alexander Graham Bell is, first, he did not invent the telephone, he got a patent for it. But he was also someone who was pretty anti-deaf despite marrying a deaf woman, which really means nothing. And he was very vocal about wanting deaf people to not marry in fear that deaf people would have deaf babies. And he just wanted it to be illegal for deaf couples to be married and things like that, so there just wouldn't be more deaf babies. A note from editing me. After going back through Google, it seems that there is a bit of back and forth on whether or not H.G. Bell actually wanted deaf people marrying to be banned. So it can't be said that he thought an actual ban of deaf people marrying each other was impractical, but he would instead suggest to find out what causes deaf people to marry each other and then just get rid of that. The case for using CRISPR for this purpose is stronger than for trying to make children HIV resistant, as attempted previously, but the risks still outweigh the benefit. Well, we don't like risk, do we? This isn't Fortnite. This isn't Risky Reels. Rybakov is definitely determined to do some germline gene editing, and I think we should take him seriously. But it's too early, it's too risky. People took A.G. Bell seriously, and that was not a fun time. Both would-be parents in each couple have a recessive form of deafness, meaning that all their children would normally inherit the same condition. While the vast majority of genetic diseases can be prevented by screening IVF embryos before implantation with no need for gene editing, this is not an option for those couples. Several reports have suggested that if it can be done safely, editing the genes of babies might be justified in this kind of situation. So because this is a risky procedure, that is exactly why Rybakov at Russia's largest fertility clinic has sought out these very unusual couples. It is clear and understandable to ordinary people, he says. Each new baby for this pair would be deaf without gene mutation editing. First of all, we're not ordinary people. This isn't no ordinary hero, this isn't X-Men, this isn't Marvel. We are ordinary people. Now, Rybakov has told New Scientist that he also wants to prevent children inheriting a form of deafness caused by mutations in the GJB2 gene. In western Siberia, many people have a missing DNA letter in position 35 of the GJB2 gene. That is so difficult for me to say. Having one copy has no effect, but those who inherit this mutation from both parents never develop the ability to hear. Rybakov has found 5 couples in which both would-be parents are deaf because of this mutation and don't want their children to be deaf too. So he plans to use CRISPR to correct this mutation in IVF embryos from these couples. All these embryos will have the mutation in both copies of the GJB2 gene. Correcting one copy using a method known as homology-directed repair will prevent deafness. So, going by what this says, I'm guessing that no matter what, there's going to be a deaf child if they conceive. And this had me confused at first because, okay, look, I'm not that knowledgeable in science. I don't know the nitty-gritty details of everything about deafness, okay? We're not perfect. But I recall my deaf friend Sheena, who is married to a deaf man, and they have one hearing child and one deaf child. And there was another deaf couple on that A&E show whose name is escaping me right now. And they have one deaf child and also another hearing child. Or all of their children except one are deaf, but there's a hearing child. Also, there's the stat that says that most deaf children are born to hearing parents. So in my head, as I'm reading it, before they got down to the nitty-gritty scientific details, I'm thinking, but there's a chance that their children are going to be hearing because that happens a lot. But I'm guessing that because of this very specific thing, no, there's a 100% chance that the child is going to be deaf. Okay, preserving deaf culture. The 5 couples don't have any choice if they want to have their own biological children who can hear, but not everyone will agree that this is a compelling need, because deafness isn't a life-threatening disorder. In fact, some people who are deaf don't consider it to be a disability and want their children to inherit the condition in order to preserve unique deaf cultures. I have a whole video with Chrissy, and also I think just by myself somewhere else in the catalog, about the whole deafness not being a disability thing. That's a hefty topic for not this video, but okay. And the risks of CRISPR certainly haven't been addressed. There's no proven way to ensure that gene-edited children won't have unintended mutations, or to ensure that every cell in the children's bodies will have the correct gene. We continue to believe that proceeding with any clinical use of germline editing remains irresponsible at this time. Medically, definitely irresponsible. I'll take your word for it. Sounds like it. But also socially irresponsible, and I'll get more into that in a minute. Editing this, I'm not sure if I do mean socially responsible, or if morally irresponsible is what I'm looking for, or something else entirely. The first human trial should start with embryos or infants with nothing to lose, with fatal conditions. You should not be starting with an embryo which stands to lead a pretty normal life. Yeah, deaf people lead normal lives. Also, I found that people with fatal diseases and illnesses also live pretty normal lives. Please see Claire. If germline gene editing is one day shown to be safe, so-and-so thinks that there would then be a moral imperative to use it to prevent conditions such as deafness. Oh boy. Okay, my thoughts. I have always been team do whatever it is that you want. I am very fully aware that not all deaf people, not all disabled people are the same. You have like 3 different groups, okay? You have the mainstream deaf people who grew up with no sign language, grew up with no community. A lot of these people don't like being deaf, or a percentage of these people don't like being deaf. But there are also some people who are fine with it, just grow up with hearing aids or cochlear implants, also without ASL or sign language, and they just, whatever. It goes anyway. And then you have people like me who grew up mainstream, and I was once feeling very ashamed for a very long time for being deaf. But then I found the deaf community thanks to the beautiful internet, and then I started learning another language and getting involved in the community, and I have never felt better. Has it come with its struggles and frustration and a lot of gatekeeping? Yes. But for the most part, I wouldn't change it. Okay, maybe the gatekeeping, but like I wouldn't change finding it and getting into it and like starting my journey and growing into that. And then you have deaf people who either were born into a hearing family, but the hearing family did everything that they could to put them into a deaf school and give them language and a community, blah blah blah, or they, were born into a deaf family and they just kept that whole thing going. And now I don't know what it's like in Russia and Siberia as far as accessibility goes. There are countries out there where accessibility is horrible, so it's likely is harder to be deaf than, say, to be deaf in places like the United States and Canada. Although accessibility in the United States and Canada is also just horrible. We have the Americans with Disabilities Act, but for the most part, it rarely actually gets enforced. But for the most part, at least in my experience, and in a couple of other people's experience, people that I know, we've been able to get through it with interpreters, with captions, with deaf schools being around, with ASL, but I don't know what that's like in Siberia, in Russia, okay, so I can't be like, well, it can't be that bad, right? And I have always been team, do whatever you want, so if you want a cochlear implant, get yourself a cochlear implant. There are many mainstream deaf people who have cochlear implants that have no connections with the deaf community. They don't know sign language, and that's just what it is. And then you have people who grew up in the culture, in the community, have cochlear implants, and they have sign language. So if you really want to cure yourself, your disability, whatever it may be, with whatever science is being developed, if you want this or that, if you don't want your child to be disabled, we can't force them. We can certainly share our opinion because we are allowed to do that, and we can give them the information just to let them know that it really isn't, deafness in itself is not a problem. The problem is the inaccessibility and the lack of respect for disabled people. The world doesn't like disabled people, we know that. But the irresponsibility, the social irresponsibility, I am frightened that because of stuff like this, it starts to become more and more the norm, and it's as if Alexander Graham Bell came back from the dead and started reinforcing things all over again, or started brainwashing people all over again. To put it simply, a hearing and able man wanting to do experiments on deaf people to mutate us so that future deaf people wouldn't actually be deaf is eugenics. Now, do I think that they would ever make it illegal for deaf people to get married and have a child? No, I hope not. But it makes me scared that the ableism would get worse, you know? So when you have a deaf child and the people are testing the hearing and everybody's like, oh, your child failed. Here's a pamphlet for hearing aids and a cochlear implant. A lot of the time they don't give out information for ASL resources and deaf community resources. Their solution is hearing aids, cochlear implant, now. Go, because they won't lead a normal life, and that's horrible. And then, like, if I come across a hearing person, which I have, who has been like, well, so-and-so has a cochlear implant, why don't you have one? Why would you actually want to be deaf? These people have fixed it, why don't you? And it's such a struggle to try to get it into their heads that the way I am isn't bad. I worry that it starts to become more and more the norm, more than it already is, to erase disability, to erase deafness. It's just like it reminds me of autism, autistic people, autism speaks, and anti-vaccines. Vaccinate your kids, people. But people are so afraid of vaccines because they're afraid that their child is gonna be autistic, why? Why are you so afraid of that? Autistic people lead normal lives, fantastic lives. I have many autistic friends, they're just fine. And I actually had to write a letter to a car dealership who was making this fundraiser for autistic people and people with Alzheimer's, and they were saying, these people are suffering so badly from autism, and I'm like, what? Why would you say something like that on your fundraiser poster? Why? Things like that do way more harm than they do good. So it's a really complicated thing. Like, we can't force you to have deaf children if you really so badly want your children to be hearing and you want to go through this experiment. We can't fly over to Western Siberia, handcuff you, and keep you away. That's absolutely horrible because that does take away their bodily autonomy. But to me right now, as I'm thinking about it, it also feels like you would be taking that away from other people, potentially, just because of people being like, why don't you get this? And being deaf is so bad. Like, Again, it reeks of eugenics. It just scares me more than it angers me. Or I am angered of it, but I think I'm so tired of being angry over everything that now I'm just scared and worried about things. So to wrap it up with the tweet that I just posted, you can't stop people from not wanting deaf children if they themselves are deaf and hate it, or can't stop them from wanting to cure themselves, but at the same time, stuff like this has a risk of being incredibly damaging to deaf people who are fine with themselves. Oh. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts about this as disabled and deaf people. If you would like to help translate this video, I would so much very appreciate it. It's always extremely helpful. Thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to watch this video, and I will see you later. Bye.